The whistle shattered the dawn like a gunshot. Smoke curled above the rails, thick and choking, as the locomotive thundered southward through the misty Georgia countryside. Trees bent under the weight of early autumn winds, their leaves trembling like the hearts of the men huddled in the shadows along the tracks. It was April 12th, 1862, though the calendar mattered little to the soldiers and spies aboard the stolen train. To them, time was measured in heartbeats, in the rhythm of pounding iron wheels, in the breath of horses left behind in the fading distance. James J. Andrews crouched low, gripping the narrow rail of the boxcar, his knuckles white under the strain. He could hear the shouted commands of the Confederate crew, though their voices carried thinly, muffled by the distance they were trying to put between themselves and their pursuers. Andrews's face was pale, his eyes hard, burning with a mixture of terror and determination. Every man on this daring mission understood that capture meant more than imprisonment. It meant execution. Spying, in the eyes of the Confederacy, was punishable by hanging. The mission had begun hours earlier in Marietta, Georgia, with the stealth of shadows and the hush of conspiratorial whispers. Andrews, a civilian scout from Kentucky, had been recruited by Union intelligence for his courage and cunning. Alongside him were 22 Union volunteers, men plucked from ordinary life and thrust into extraordinary danger. They carried no uniforms, for to wear the blue of the Union Army in Confederate territory would be a death sentence on sight. Instead, they bore the guise of railway workers, their hands blackened with soot, their clothing rough and unassuming. Each man knew the stakes, yet each moved forward, driven by a sense of purpose that transcended fear. The target lay ahead, the Western and Atlantic Railroad, a lifeline for Confederate supply lines. The plan was audacious in its simplicity and terrifying in its execution. Seize a locomotive, drive it north toward Union lines, and destroy track and telegraph lines along the way to cripple Confederate communications and logistics. It was a mission that required precision, nerve, and the kind of daring that bordered on madness. And as Andrews watched the morning sun glint off the rails, he understood fully the knife edge on which their fate balanced. Ahead, the locomotive came into view, a massive iron behemoth with a black smokestack that pierced the grey dawn like a sword. The crew was small, unaware of the men who waited in the nearby woodline, plotting their seizure. Andrews signaled with a subtle motion, and two volunteers slipped silently from the cover of trees, approaching the engine under the pretense of inspecting the track. The world narrowed to the hiss of steam, the creak of wooden ties, and the unsteady rhythm of his own pulse. Then, in a moment that would later be recounted with awe and disbelief, the men struck. Andrews and his team overpowered the crew before they could sound alarm. Guns were drawn, voices barked, hands shook, but the locomotive belonged to them now. It was a stolen dragon, a machine alive with smoke and fire, and it would carry them into history or into death. As they raced northward, the landscape blurred into a tapestry of forest and field, each mile a victory and a potential trap. Telegraph wires snaked above them, each one a thread that could unravel their mission with a single tapped message. Confederate pursuers were quick to mobilize. Every whistle from the stolen train was a clarion call to alert the enemy. Andrew's mind raced as fast as the iron wheels beneath him. He could see the small towns they passed, the farmers blinking in disbelief at at the sight of an unauthorized locomotive hurtling through their midst. Fear, excitement, and adrenaline coursed through every man aboard. They tore through stations, pausing only to sabotage what they could. Rail ties were pried loose, switches reversed, telegraph lines cut. Each act, simple in its execution, was monumental in consequence. For a brief, intoxicating moment, it felt as if they could change the course of the war with their own hands. Andrews glanced around at the faces of his companions, faces drawn tight with strain, eyes wide with exhilaration and terror. Every man carried the same knowledge. Success was improbable, survival less so. Hours passed like minutes. The engine's whistle, once a harbinger of conquest, became a beacon of danger. Confederate forces, alerted to the theft, mobilized rapidly, sending trains and riders in hot pursuit. The volunteers' stolen locomotive became a moving battlefield. Smoke and steam mingled with the dust kicked up by the churning wheels, creating a haze that obscured friend and foe alike. Each turn of the wheel was a gamble, each mile a testament to the men's courage and endurance. At one point, the track curved sharply around a wooded ridge, and Andrews saw the approaching Confederate train in the distance. It was a moment that would haunt him in nightmares, the realization that death and capture could overtake them with the next bend. The men worked frantically, cutting ties and disabling switches, desperate to slow their pursuers. Sparks flew from the iron as brakes were applied, the screech of metal against metal echoing through the morning mist like a scream. Time seemed to stretch, elastic and cruel. Every second weighted with consequence. Yet, despite the mounting peril, the men pressed on. Andrews could feel the tension coiling in his stomach like a live wire. Every decision mattered. Every misstep could cost their lives. And yet, in the face of almost certain disaster, there was a strange beauty in their unity, a clarity of purpose that made the impossible seem within reach. The stolen locomotive, a monstrous engine of smoke and fire, became more than a machine. It was a vessel carrying their courage, their desperation, and their audacity across a divided land. As afternoon fell, fatigue began to gnaw at them. Hands blistered, faces streaked with soot and sweat, they pushed forward, driven by sheer will. The countryside unfolded in a blur of greens and browns, punctuated by the occasional farmstead, where women and children stared with a mixture of awe and fear. The volunteers had become specters on rails, moving faster than the eye could follow, leaving behind a trail of disrupted communication, broken track, and the echo of their audacity. Andrews, sitting near the engine, felt the weight of history pressing on him. They were men out of place and out of time, actors in a drama written by war itself. He thought of home, of family, of the life that seemed impossibly distant now. Yet there was no time for longing, no luxury of hesitation. Each mile carried them further into danger, but also deeper into legend. By nightfall, the engine was nearly out of fuel, the men exhausted to the point of collapse. They were deep in enemy territory, far from safety, with Confederate forces closing in. Every shadow seemed to hide an adversary, every rustle of leaves a signal of pursuit. The tension was unbearable, a living thing that wrapped around them, tightening with each passing moment. Andrews's hands shook as he helped stoke the fire, the locomotive's heat a cruel reminder of both life and death. And then, just as hope began to waver, disaster struck. The engine faltered, stuttering under the strain of overuse. Coal ran low. Water supplies dwindled. The men's muscles burned with exhaustion, their nerves frayed to breaking. The impossible dream of escape began to crumble, replaced by the stark reality of their situation. They were trapped between the relentless advance of the enemy and the unforgiving machinery they had commandeered. The world had narrowed to the hiss of steam, the clatter of wheels, and the pounding of 23 hearts in unison. In that dark, smoke-filled night, Andrews made a silent vow. Whatever happened, their courage, their audacity would not be forgotten. The story they were writing with sweat, fire, and iron would echo far beyond the rails they had stolen. And as the stars blinked above the Georgia forest, cold and indifferent, the men prepared for the fight that would decide whether they would live to see another dawn, or become ghosts of a war that had already claimed too many. The night pressed down like a heavy cloak, suffocating, relentless. The stolen locomotive groaned beneath them, its iron belly trembling with exhaustion and strain. James Andrews and his men were silent, each face illuminated by the glow of a dying fire in the engine's belly. Their breaths came in ragged clouds, mingling with steam that hissed and spat from the boiler, a chorus of metal and human desperation. Somewhere in the darkness, the forest whispered, leaves rattling in the cold wind, branches snapping under invisible footsteps, as if the land itself had become a sentinel against their escape. Hours passed in agonizing suspense. The volunteers huddled against the noise and vibration, straining for any sound of pursuit. The plan, once so clear, now seemed impossibly fragile. They were a handful of men against an entire Confederate network. Every mile carried the weight of their audacity and the shadow of near certain death. Andrews thought of the homes they had left behind, the letters, the laughter, the faces they might never see again. The thought tightened a fist around his heart, but he shoved it down. Survival demanded focus, not sentiment. The engine coughed again, a violent metallic spasm, and he gritted his teeth, steeling himself. By dawn, the first distant whistle sounded. A Confederate locomotive racing from Big Shanty in pursuit pierced the still morning air like a gunshot. The men stiffened, senses sharpening to a painful edge. Every moment was now measured not in miles, but in breaths and decisions. Andrews leaned over the side of the cab, eyes scanning the horizon. Smoke trailed behind their pursuers, thin at first, then thickening into a dark, hungry serpent. The chase became a macabre dance. Each curve of the track brought new terror, each milepost a countdown. Andrews's team worked with methodical desperation, prying rails, burning ties, cutting telegraph lines. Every act slowed their pursuers, but also taxed the locomotive further. The engine's whistle, once their triumphal cry, now carried a note of defiance, a shriek of rebellion against the inevitability of capture. One of the men, William Campbell, leaned out to cut a telegraph line near Dalton. The wire hissed as sparks flew, and a sudden misstep sent him tumbling into the gravel beside the track. Andrews lunged, grabbing his arm, hauling him back with a force born of fear and necessity. "Stay with me," he barked, the words raw, desperate. The engine roared as if in agreement, propelling them forward on a trembling ribbon of iron. By mid-morning, fatigue had transformed into near hysteria. The men were shadows of themselves, faces streaked with soot, eyes hollow from lack of sleep, muscles trembling with the effort of constant motion. The locomotive, a machine they had stolen, had become an extension of their own bodies, alive with the strain of human will. Andrews could feel the pulse of metal under his hands, every vibration a warning. The engine coughed again and again, a beast on the brink of collapse. The chase intensified near the town of Kingston. Confederate soldiers, mounted and determined, fanned out along the tracks, attempting to flank the stolen train. Andrews and his team worked furiously, reversing switches and attempting to derail any pursuing engines. Sparks flew as the iron wheels met the rails, and the screech of metal against metal filled the valley. For a fleeting moment, it seemed as if their courage might carry them past every obstacle. But the enemy adapted quickly. Every trick, every sabotage was countered with discipline and speed. By noon, the volunteers were running on pure instinct. Hunger, thirst, and exhaustion clawed at them, yet the mission propelled them forward. Andrews's mind oscillated between clarity and delirium. He saw flashes of the countryside, fields dotted with grazing cattle, the distant smoke of a farmhouse chimney, the occasional curious child waving. But they were mere specters in a world of iron, fire, and danger. The chase had transformed the landscape into a theater of tension, every tree and hill a potential obstacle or refuge. Disaster struck near the station at Adairsville. The locomotive, pushed beyond its limits, began to falter. Steam hissed violently from the boiler. The engine groaned under the weight of its stolen cargo and exhausted crew. Andrews shouted orders, his voice cracking from exertion, but the machine obeyed only in part, staggering like a wounded animal. The Confederate pursuers, now terrifyingly close, pressed their advantage, closing the distance with terrifying speed. Andrews realized the inevitable. To go forward was almost certainly to death. To stop meant certain capture. With a decision that would define their courage, he ordered the volunteers to abandon the train near the station and scatter into the surrounding woods. They moved quickly, taking only what they could carry: guns, a few supplies, their lives hanging by the thinnest of threads. The locomotive, the symbol of their daring, was lost to them, reclaimed by the enemy they had defied. The men vanished into the forest, shadows slipping between trees, hearts hammering with every sound. Confederate soldiers swarmed the area, shouting commands, rifles raised. But the volunteers were ghosts, moving through underbrush and hidden ravines with a knowledge of the land and a desperation that made them invisible. Andrews led them, senses alert to every snap of a twig, every distant hoofbeat. Exhaustion finally overtook them, and they were forced to rest in hidden hollows, listening to the night settle over the land like a shroud. Every man bore the physical evidence of their ordeal: blisters, bruises, cuts. But it was the psychological strain that weighed heaviest. Fear had a texture now, palpable and suffocating. Yet beneath it, a strange exhilaration persisted. They had dared what few could even imagine, and for a moment, history had seemed malleable under their hands. But the Confederates were relentless. Within hours, patrols combed the countryside, tracking footprints, questioning locals, and hunting the volunteers with dogged persistence. Andrews and his men realized that survival depended on stealth, cunning, and sheer luck. Each shadow became a potential threat, each distant sound a warning. The night stretched endlessly, filled with the tension of the hunted. The first capture occurred near a small creek. A Confederate soldier had lain in wait, and William Campbell, too fatigued to detect the trap, stumbled into his line of sight. A shot rang out, cutting through the night air, and Campbell fell. Andrews reached him moments too late. The man was alive, but captured. The others scattered further, the group fragmenting under the pressure of pursuit. Andrews' heart tightened at the loss, but the mission demanded focus. Survival required detachment, even as grief and fears clawed at him. By morning, only a handful of volunteers remained free, moving silently through the countryside. Hunger and thirst gnawed at them, their bodies aching with exhaustion. Andrews knew the odds were slim. Capture was likely, yet he refused to surrender mentally. Every step through the forest was a testament to resilience. Every decision a battle of wits against an enemy who knew the land intimately. Weeks passed in this grueling cycle of flight and concealment. Some men were captured and imprisoned. Others managed brief reprieves in sympathetic homes, hidden by civilians who risked their own lives to shelter them. Andrews himself was eventually caught, betrayed by fatigue and circumstance, and imprisoned in Atlanta. The conditions were brutal: overcrowding, disease, and the constant threat of execution. Yet even in confinement, the spirit of the mission persisted. The men had struck at the heart of Confederate supply lines, inspiring stories that would ripple far beyond their immediate ordeal. News of the daring raid reached Union command, and the bravery of Andrews and his men was recognized. Some were executed, a grim testament to the peril of espionage, while others would eventually be released or escape. The story of the Great Locomotive Chase became legend, an almost unbelievable tale of courage, audacity, and the fragile line between life and death. Andrews, reflecting from his prison cell, understood the paradox of their endeavor. A mission that had failed in its immediate objective had succeeded in something far greater. It had tested the limits of human endurance, courage, and ingenuity. It had created a story that would endure for generations, a testament to the extraordinary acts ordinary men were capable of under pressure. In the years that followed, the men of the Great Locomotive Chase were remembered as heroes, their courage celebrated in books, medals, and commemorations. The stolen locomotive, the chase, the daring sabotage, all became symbols of a war defined by innovation, bravery, and the unpredictable nature of human resolve. For Andrews and the others, the memory lingered, vivid as the hiss of steam and the thunder of wheels, a reminder of the edge of death and the resilience of the human spirit. The days in confinement in Atlanta were a slow erosion of spirit and body. The air was thick with the stench of overcrowding, damp stone, and unwashed bodies. James Andrews sat on a narrow wooden bench, his back pressed against the cold wall of his cell, listening to the distant clatter of chains, the murmurs of men whose fates mirrored his own. Hunger gnawed at him, but it was the silence between the sounds, the weight of waiting, that seemed the heaviest burden. Time stretched in jagged lines. Every hour felt like a year, every day a repetition of the last. He remembered the chase vividly, each detail etched into memory: the roar of the locomotive, the scent of smoke and oil, the adrenaline that had sharpened his senses beyond the natural human limit. But here, stripped of action, those memories became both torment and solace. He clung to them, replaying the daring maneuvers, the sabotage of tracks, the thrill of outpacing their pursuers, as if reliving it could somehow strengthen him against despair. Around him, other men whispered fragments of the story, half-formed recollections of a mission that had seemed impossible even when it succeeded in its audacity. The Confederate authorities were unsparing. For espionage, The penalty was death, and Andrews knew it. Soldiers came daily to interrogate, their questions a mixture of curiosity and menace. They demanded names, orders, plans, but Andrews held fast. Every refusal was a knife edge between defiance and doom. He was not alone in this resolve. Other captured volunteers shared the same grim determination, their eyes carrying a flicker of the same fiery courage that had propelled them into danger weeks before. In one particularly bitter confrontation, a Confederate officer thrust a letter toward Andrews, a thin veneer of civility masking the threat behind it. "Tell us who sent you," the officer said, voice flat but firm, "or this ends tonight." Andrews looked at the paper, then back at the man. Sweat ran down his temple, but he did not flinch. "I answer only for my own actions," he said. The officer's face tightened with frustration, and Andrews was marched back to the cell, defiance intact. Small victories such as these became the currency of survival. The physical hardships were relentless. Rations were meager and foul, the water often stagnant and brackish. Disease spread quickly in the cramped quarters. Men he had fought alongside in the chase fell ill. Their bodies weakened until they could barely lift their heads. Andrews tended to them when he could, sharing a crust of bread or a sip of water, small gestures of humanity amid the cruelty. Bonds forged in the fires of the chase persisted even here, among the shadows and the suffering. Weeks stretched into months. Each day was a test of endurance, trial of will. Yet, within the bleakness, Andrews discovered unexpected resilience. He learned the rhythms of the prison, the habits of the guards, the quiet spaces where hope could survive. He memorized routines, noting when doors would be left unlatched, when patrols were lax. Survival demanded ingenuity as much as courage. It was a different kind of mission now, but one no less critical. The prisoners whispered of escape, tentative plans woven in hushed voices. Every conversation carried the thrill of possibility and the terror of failure. One night, Andrews joined a group plotting to slip past the sentries under cover of darkness. The air was thick with anticipation and fear, the only sounds the soft shuffle of feet and the distant dripping of water in the stone corridors. They moved silently, hearts pounding, each man aware that a single misstep could mean death. The attempt was audacious, but ultimately unsuccessful. Guards intercepted them before they could leave the compound, and punishment followed swiftly. Confinement in smaller cells, loss of privileges, the weight of despair pressing anew. Yet, even in failure, the spark of resistance endured. Andrews realized that survival was not merely about evasion. It was about maintaining the integrity of spirit against forces that sought to break it. The broader war continued around them. News filtered through the prison walls, stories of battles won and lost, of generals fallen and armies moving across the fractured landscape. Andrews felt disconnected from it, a ghost witnessing the tides of history from behind stone walls. Yet the knowledge that their actions in the chase had captured attention, had inspired hope in the Union, lent purpose to the suffering. They were part of a larger story, one in which courage and daring could ripple outward, touching lives far beyond their immediate grasp. By mid-1863, Andrews and several of the volunteers were transferred to the dreaded military prison at Savannah. The journey itself was brutal. Packed into cramped wagons, subjected to harsh treatment, their bodies weakened, their minds strained, they endured days of discomfort and fear. Yet they traveled with a quiet dignity, a defiance that could not be extinguished. The guards noted it, but could not understand it. The resolve of men who had already faced death and returned, if only briefly, to tell the tale. In Savannah, the conditions were worse. Heat, humidity, and overcrowding combined with the constant threat of violence. Men were sickened by dysentery, fever, and despair. Andrews witnessed death in its rawest form. Friends collapsing in bunks, carried away without ceremony, their absence a hollow reminder of mortality. Yet amid this horror, acts of bravery persisted. Small kindnesses, a shared portion of bread, a whispered warning of a guard's approach, became lifelines, threads of humanity woven into a tapestry of suffering. Andrews' own health faltered. Fever left him weak, his body ached, and yet he refused to succumb to despair. In the quiet moments of the night, he reflected on the chase, on the stolen locomotive, and on the men who had fallen. Their mission, though not wholly successful in its immediate objective, had become legend. And though confined, Andrews understood that courage does not always require freedom. It resides in the choices one makes when every option is perilous. In October, word arrived that a few prisoners would be exchanged under a negotiated deal between Union and Confederate authorities. The hope it brought was tempered by uncertainty. Would they be freed, or was it another cruel test of patience and will? Andrews and his companions prepared, hearts both heavy and tentative, aware that the relief of release was only part of the story. The scars of their ordeal would linger, etched deep into memory and flesh. The exchange was chaotic, but ultimately successful for those included. Andrews stepped from the confines of the prison into the crisp air of freedom, the sun warm on his face, light striking the sweat and soot still clinging to his skin. The world beyond the prison walls was unchanged in its vastness, indifferent to individuals' suffering. Yet every breath of wind, every rustle of leaves felt like a reclamation of life itself. He was free, but not unscathed. Memory, guilt, grief, and pride mingled, each step forward a negotiation between the past and the uncertain future. The men who survived the chase and its aftermath became symbols of audacity. Some were honored with medals, their deeds recounted in newspapers and military dispatches. Yet the recognition was not the true reward. It was the affirmation that courage could endure, that ordinary men could commit extraordinary acts, that the human spirit could confront danger, fear, and death itself with defiance and ingenuity. Andrews returned home briefly, though the war still raged. Letters from loved ones, the embrace of family, and the familiarity of streets once walked as a civilian offered a fragile restoration. Yet he carried with him the knowledge of loss, the memory of comrades who had vanished into captivity or death, and the unshakable awareness that history had been altered, however subtly, by the audacity of a stolen train and a handful of determined men. The Great Locomotive Chase remained etched in public memory, celebrated in stories, and eventually immortalized in official records and books. Its audacity, nearly impossible to believe, inspired countless others in the Union cause. Yet for those who had lived it, including Andrews, the tale was never just legend. It was lived experience, a crucible of human courage, endurance, and sacrifice, unforgettable in its terror and triumph. The war raged on, relentless and unforgiving, while James Andrews attempted to reintegrate into a world that seemed both familiar and irreparably altered. The streets of his hometown were lined with the quiet grief of those who had lost fathers, sons, and brothers. Flags hung from porches, their colors bright against the autumn sky. But they were symbols of a country fractured, bleeding, and desperately seeking unity. Andrews walked among neighbors who greeted him with cautious admiration, their eyes reflecting pride tempered with disbelief. To them, he was a hero, yet he carried the weight of failure as keenly as the laurel of daring. Letters arrived from surviving comrades, recounting the scattered fates of those involved in the chase. Some had escaped captivity, traveling miles of hostile terrain to rejoin Union lines. Others languished in prisons far from home, their health and spirits eroded by neglect and brutality. Each story was a reminder of the narrow margin between survival and death, of the randomness with which fortune had dealt its hand. Andrews read these letters over and over, memorizing the details, the names, the landscapes, the small acts of bravery that had made survival possible. In Washington, the military recognized the courage of the men with a measure of ceremony. Andrews and a few surviving volunteers received the first Medals of Honor, a distinction newly created to acknowledge acts of valor above and beyond the call of duty. The ceremony was formal, restrained, yet the honor carried the weight of history. Andrews felt conflicted. Pride mingled with sorrow for those who would never stand in that hall, whose lives had been claimed by the very courage that brought him here. He understood that recognition could never fully reconcile the cost, that heroism was always bound inextricably to loss. And yet, as the months stretched into years, the chase became more than an individual story. It was woven into the larger fabric of the Civil War, a testament to ingenuity, audacity, and the unpredictable interplay of human will and circumstance. Military strategists studied the event, dissecting the decisions, the risks, the near-miraculous execution. Children read of it in newspapers. Soldiers spoke of it in campfires. Historians would later immortalize it in books and essays. The stolen locomotive, a machine of iron and fire, became a symbol of what a small, determined group could accomplish against overwhelming odds. For Andrews personally, the aftermath was bittersweet. He returned to Kentucky, attempting to reclaim a life interrupted by extraordinary events. Every day was punctuated by reminders of the chase, friends who had fallen, comrades who had vanished, memories that refused to fade. Yet he also found solace in routine, the smell of earth after rain, the quiet rhythm of domestic life, the laughter of children, the mundane tasks that anchored him to the living world. Courage, he realized, was not only the act of daring, but also the endurance of ordinary life after extraordinary danger. Occasionally, he revisited the railroad, watching engines thunder past, remembering the roar, the heat, the smell of coal and iron. The tracks seemed unchanged, indifferent, yet for him, they were a sacred landscape, etched with memories of fear, triumph, and human resilience. He could still hear the whistle in his mind, a sound that had once signaled both liberation and doom. In quiet moments, he imagined the faces of his comrades, the camaraderie that had defined their fleeting, terrifying adventure, and the cost of the mission that had bound them together forever. The chase also left a deeper imprint on military strategy and Union morale. Its audacity inspired subsequent raids and guerrilla operations, shaping the understanding that courage, timing, and ingenuity could achieve results disproportionate to numbers and firepower. It demonstrated that the battlefield was not limited to open fields or fortifications, but extended into railways, forests, and towns, spaces where daring men could exploit both machinery and terrain to change the course of events. Yet, despite its heroism, the chase remained a cautionary tale. Historians would later note the fragility of its success. A single miscalculation, a moment of hesitation, or the relentless pursuit by the enemy could, and nearly did, result in total failure. Andrews and his volunteers had walked the edge of death, their lives sustained only by skill, determination, and sheer will. It was a human story, not just a military one. A reminder that courage often comes wrapped in uncertainty, risk, and sacrifice. In the years following the war, Andrews dedicated himself to sharing the lessons of the chase, not as a boast, but as a testament to human perseverance. He spoke to young soldiers, wrote letters, and recounted his experiences with careful attention to detail. He emphasized the importance of teamwork, the value of ingenuity, and the relentless necessity of courage when circumstances seemed insurmountable. He wanted the story to endure, not only as a record of daring, but as a guidepost for future generations. Even as the decades passed, the memory of the chase retained its power. Veterans gathered to remember, families preserved letters and photographs, and historians continued to marvel at the audacity of a handful of men who had challenged the vast machinery of war with nothing more than determination and courage. The locomotive itself, now retired and preserved, became a tangible link to the past, a steel testament to the extraordinary human spirit. Visitors could walk along the tracks, touch the iron wheels, and imagine the speed, fear, and resolve of men who had risked everything for a mission that seemed impossible. James Andrews lived into the 1860s and beyond, witnessing the slow reconstruction of a fractured nation, the rebuilding of homes and communities, and the eventual reunion of a country scarred by conflict. He saw children grow, families thrive, and towns transform, all while carrying the invisible weight of memory. The chase, while a single thread in the vast tapestry of the Civil War, defined him in profound ways. It shaped his understanding of bravery, loyalty, and the fragile line between life and death. He never forgot the faces of men who had been with him, the volunteers who had risked everything, some never to return, others to live haunted by the ordeal. Each carried their own scars, visible and invisible, yet all shared a bond forged in fire and steel. They had stolen a locomotive, defied an enemy, and survived long enough to see history remember them. The magnitude of what they attempted, and, in its way, accomplished, was nearly unimaginable, even to those who had lived it. In the end, the Great Locomotive Chase endured not only as a tale of military daring, but as a story of human resilience, ingenuity, and the capacity to confront impossible odds. Andrews and his men had faced death, risked everything, and left a legacy that would ripple through history. It was a story of courage tested against fear, determination against despair, and audacity against impossibility. Their lives had intersected with history in a way that few ever do, and the world, in the echo of iron wheels and the hiss of steam, never forgot. Andrews spent his final years quietly, yet with a sense of fulfillment, knowing that the tale of the chase, the courage of ordinary men achieving extraordinary acts, would endure. Each time a train whistled along a distant track, he felt the pulse of history, the reminder of a moment when the impossible had been attempted and almost achieved. He had lived through danger, despair, and near certain death, and he had returned to tell the story. And that, in itself, was triumph enough. The surviving volunteers emerged from the war marked in ways both visible and invisible. Each bore the weight of experiences that defied ordinary comprehension. A stolen locomotive, the frantic chase through hostile territory, the terror of capture, the harrowing days in Confederate prisons. These were men who had flirted with death daily, whose courage had been tested in fire and steel, whose lives were forever altered by a single audacious mission. Yet when they returned to civilian life, they found a country transformed, and they themselves became outsiders in familiar landscapes. William Campbell, whose tumble during the chase had led to his initial capture, struggled with the lingering physical toll of imprisonment. His legs bore the marks of harsh confinement, and simple tasks left him breathless. Yet he carried a fiery determination in his eyes, a refusal to let suffering define him. In Louisville, he recounted stories of the chase to young recruits and neighbors alike, his voice imbued with both caution and inspiration. He emphasized the importance of courage tempered by strategy, of daring combined with preparation, a lesson learned too painfully through first-hand experience. Others fared differently. William Knight, captured near the Georgia woods, survived imprisonment but returned home a shadow of himself. Nightmares haunted him, replaying the relentless Confederate pursuit, the sound of wheels screeching over rails, the hissing of steam. Sleep became a tenuous refuge, and he found solace only in long, solitary walks through fields and forests, reliving the landscapes that had once been both a theater of survival and a trap. Each tree, each creek carried echoes of terror and bravery intertwined. For James Andrews, the legacy of the chase was both public and personal. He received accolades from military and civic leaders, yet the praise was accompanied by an intimate grief. The men who had fallen in captivity or on the trail were never forgotten. Each medal, each public acknowledgement carried the silent weight of those absent. Andrews often visited the graves of comrades when traveling near the sites of the chase, leaving small tokens, a sprig of greenery, a folded note, a whispered prayer. It was his way of honoring the lives entwined with his own in a moment of history that had demanded everything. The societal impact of the chase was profound. In newspapers across the Union, tales of the stolen locomotive and the men who risked everything were printed with a mixture of awe and incredulity. Readers marveled at the audacity, the ingenuity, and the sheer bravery of a small band of men challenging an entire railroad network deep in enemy territory. Letters poured into the War Department, some inquiring after the volunteers' well-being, others proposing similar daring missions. The story captured imaginations, inspiring courage beyond the battlefield and into the hearts of civilians who read of it in ink and paper. The men themselves understood that heroism was not without consequence. Survivors faced both public admiration and private turmoil. Some struggled to reconcile the adulation with the personal cost of their actions, haunted by memories of comrades lost, mistakes made, and the fragile margins that had preserved their lives. Each man carried his own story, a mosaic of terror, triumph, fatigue, and resilience. When they met, sometimes decades later, the bond was instantaneous, a recognition of shared peril and unspoken understanding. Words were few, but presence spoke volumes. Military historians would later dissect the chase, noting its significance not only as a daring raid, but as a study in human endurance and ingenuity. The volunteers' ability to adapt, improvise, and persist against overwhelming odds became a benchmark for evaluating similar operations. They had demonstrated that even a handful of determined men could disrupt strategic networks, creating ripples far beyond their immediate actions. The chase, though small in scale compared to entire campaigns, became emblematic of the transformative potential of courage under pressure. Yet for those who lived it, the story was never merely strategic. It was personal, visceral, and enduring. Men recounted their endless hours on the locomotive, the smell of coal and smoke, the vibration of wheels against rails, the tense coordination of sabotage and evasion. They spoke of the terror of discovery, the near misses, the ingenuity required to survive. Each memory was vivid, a film reel running in their minds, often triggered by the simplest cues. The whistle of a train, the crackle of fire, the rustle of autumn leaves. Communities along the routes where the chase unfolded were also touched, their lives briefly intersecting with a historical event that few could have imagined. Farmers, townspeople, and local workers witnessed glimpses of the drama. A locomotive speeding through their fields, men fleeing into woods, soldiers in pursuit. The testimonies collected years later painted a mosaic of astonishment and fear. These civilians, unknowingly part of history, became silent witnesses to courage enacted in its rawest, most dangerous form. Decades passed, yet the chase remained alive in memory and in tangible reminders. Locomotives were preserved in museums, rail lines commemorated with plaques, and reenactments staged to honor the daring of a small group of men who had defied convention, danger, and the odds. Andrews and his surviving companions occasionally attended these events, walking among steel and timber, feeling once more the pulse of history beneath their feet. It was both celebration and reflection, a recognition that audacity could endure beyond the fleeting moment of action, that the courage of ordinary men could resonate across generations. In his later years, Andrews often reflected on the paradox of the chase. They had failed in their immediate objective, to cripple Confederate supply lines, but succeeded in creating a story of human endurance, ingenuity, and bravery that would last far longer than any single military engagement. The moral weight of courage, sacrifice, and persistence outweighed tactical results. The chase became an allegory of audacity, a testament to what could be achieved when ordinary men embraced extraordinary risk, knowing the cost might be their very lives. Andrews lived quietly, yet with a deep sense of purpose. He mentored young men, advised on military strategy, and wrote letters to preserve the memory of those who had fallen. His legacy was intertwined with theirs, a reminder that history is not only shaped by generals and politicians, but also by men who dare, who act, who refuse to yield to fear. Every account, every retelling, became a thread in a tapestry connecting past, present, and future. Even as trains evolved, engines became faster, rails stretched farther, and wars took on new forms. The story of the chase retained its resonance. It was a story of human courage in the face of the impossible, of ingenuity under pressure, and of the fragile balance between life and death. It endured because it was real, because men had risked everything, and because history itself had paused to record their audacity. Andrews's final reflections were simple, yet profound. Courage was not measured by medals or recognition, but by the willingness to act when failure seemed inevitable, when the margin between life and death was as thin as the rail beneath a speeding locomotive. The chase, in all its terror, excitement, and consequence, embodied that principle fully. He had witnessed it, lived it, and survived it. A rare privilege that left him forever changed, yet profoundly alive. The war ground on, brutal and unrelenting, while James Andrews and the surviving volunteers of the Great Locomotive Chase attempted to reconcile life with memory. Battles raged across Virginia, Tennessee, and Georgia, consuming men and towns with equal ferocity. The thunder of artillery, the smoke of gunpowder, and the moans of the wounded became part of the landscape, as constant as the wind through the trees. Yet even amid this chaos, the chase endured in its own strange way, a beacon of courage, audacity, and the limits of human endurance. For Andrews, the end of the war brought both relief and grief. Union forces pressed southward, reclaiming territory, dismantling Confederate fortifications, and liberating towns that had suffered under occupation. Yet each victory carried a human toll. Homes destroyed, families displaced, communities shattered. He traveled to witness the liberation of Atlanta, the very city where he had been imprisoned, the place that had once felt like a tomb. The streets were scarred with battle, but life persisted. Children ran among rubble, markets reopened, and survivors sought to rebuild. It was a world scarred and resilient, much like the men who had lived through the chase. Andrews met other veterans of the chase during this time, their reunion bittersweet. Some had returned from captivity, decades younger in appearance, but older in spirit. Their bodies weakened, but their resolve unbroken. Each shared the same memories of fear, exhilaration, and near-certain death. They spoke of nights huddled in forests, of engines stolen and pursued, of the moments when courage had clashed with chance. Words were often unnecessary. A shared glance conveyed decades of experience, the unspoken acknowledgement that they had been through something few could comprehend. The broader nation began the slow, painful process of reconstruction. Railroads were repaired, towns rebuilt, and governance restored. Yet the story of the chase lingered in the public consciousness. Newspapers recounted the audacity of the volunteers. Military histories dissected the event. Medals were awarded posthumously and to survivors. For the Union, the chase became a symbol of initiative and bravery, a story demonstrating that even in a massive, grinding conflict, small groups could alter the course of events. For the volunteers, it was a testament to what men could endure and achieve when pushed to the edge of possibility. Andrews dedicated himself to ensuring that the story of the chase endured accurately. He wrote letters to historians, corresponded with military officials, and recounted the events in speeches to soldiers and civilians alike. His focus was precise. The chase was not mere adventure, but a test of strategy, courage, and human endurance. Each act of sabotage, each mile of pursuit, each narrow escape was documented with care, a mosaic of human determination against overwhelming odds. He wanted future generations to understand not only the audacity of the mission, but the profound cost it exacted. Personal life brought its own challenges and solace. Andrews married, raising a family while carrying the invisible scars of war. Nights were sometimes haunted by dreams of smoke, steel, and pursuers, yet by day he walked among children, neighbors, and friends, embodying resilience and quiet strength. He shared lessons learned not only in war, but in survival, courage under pressure, loyalty to one's companions, and the capacity to endure when all seems lost. These lessons became the fabric of his later years, shaping not only his legacy, but the lives of those around him. The chase also left an indelible mark on military thinking. Officers studied the event for its lessons in unconventional warfare, demonstrating how mobility, initiative, and audacity could disrupt larger forces. The volunteers' actions influenced subsequent raids, espionage operations, and even training exercises, cementing the notion that courage and ingenuity could achieve disproportionate results. It was a lesson in the power of human will, a principle as enduring as the iron rails they had once commandeered. Decades passed. The survivors grew older, their bodies bearing the physical and emotional toll of youth spent in extraordinary danger. Some, like Campbell, continued to recount the chase to new generations, their voices a bridge between past and present. Museums preserved locomotives, rail lines became historical sites, and plaques commemorated the audacity of men who risked all for a mission few would dare attempt. Andrews often visited these sites, observing the gleam of polished metal, the careful preservation of history, and the reverence of visitors who sought to understand what it had taken to seize a locomotive and outrun an army. He reflected often on the paradox of the chase, a mission that had failed tactically yet succeeded in creating enduring legend. Courage, he realized, was not measured by medals or public acclaim alone, but by the willingness to act when failure was probable, when risk hovered like a blade above the head, when human ingenuity and perseverance were the only tools between life and oblivion. The chase was a testament to that principle, a vivid demonstration that ordinary men could perform extraordinary deeds when circumstance demanded it. Andrews also thought of those who had not survived, the volunteers who had died in captivity. The men who had succumbed to exhaustion, disease, or injury remained ever present in memory. He honored them privately, visiting graves when possible, leaving flowers or small tokens of remembrance. He understood that history often commemorates those who survive, but true courage encompasses all who participate, regardless of outcome. The chase was not merely a story of victory. It was a story of human endurance, sacrifice, and moral courage in the face of the impossible. As the nation healed, the story of the Great Locomotive Chase continued to inspire. Soldiers learned of it in training, children in school, and citizens in newspapers and lectures. It became more than history. It was a lesson in audacity, a reminder that the actions of a few could ripple outward, touching countless lives and influencing events far beyond their immediate sphere. The stolen locomotive, the chase through hostile territory, the perilous escape attempts, all became symbols of human courage preserved against the erosion of time. James Andrews spent his final years quietly but with purpose, ensuring that the legacy of the chase endured with fidelity and dignity. His reflections were simple but profound, that courage is measured not only in action but in persistence, not only in daring but in the moral integrity with which one faces risk, and not only in survival but in honoring those who do not. The Great Locomotive Chase, nearly unbelievable yet entirely true, remained a testament to these principles, an extraordinary chapter in the epic story of the Civil War. As the sun set on his life, Andrews often imagined the roar of the locomotive, the hiss of steam, the pounding of iron wheels over rails. He remembered the faces of men who had risked everything, the terror and exhilaration of a mission that defied reason, and the fragile margin by which courage triumphed over despair. The memory was vivid, cinematic, and eternal, a final reminder that ordinary men, when confronted with extraordinary circumstances, could shape history with audacity, ingenuity, and the unyielding human spirit. In the quiet twilight of his life, James Andrews often sat by the window of his modest home, the scent of autumn drifting through the air. Outside, trains rumbled along distant rails, their whistles echoing like ghosts of the past. He would close his eyes and imagine the roar of the stolen locomotive, the iron wheels thrumming beneath him, the hiss of steam mingling with the cries of pursuit, and the distant shouts of men at the edge of exhaustion. Those sounds were no longer threats. They were memories, vivid and sacred, reminders of a moment when courage and human will had been tested to their absolute limits. The men who had survived the chase had scattered across the country. Some returned to farms, others to workshops, a few to military service. Each carried the invisible scars of their ordeal, the weight of experience that few outsiders could comprehend. Letters traveled slowly but connected them, recounting small victories, moments of quiet reflection, and ongoing struggles with the lingering shadows of fear and trauma. They shared a bond that transcended distance and time, a brotherhood forged in the fires of extraordinary danger and mutual reliance. Andrews often reflected on the paradox of heroism. The chase had failed in its immediate tactical objective, destroying Confederate rail lines and supplies, but it had succeeded in shaping something far greater, a story of human audacity that would endure for generations. Every reenactment, every retelling in books, newspapers, and lectures carried the same lesson. Ordinary men, faced with impossible odds, could rise to extraordinary acts. It was not the medals nor the official recognition that mattered most. It was the enduring testament to courage, creativity, and resolve. Memories of those who had perished remained constant companions. He thought often of the young men who had slipped through forests, crossed rivers, and scaled hills only to fall into enemy hands. Their lives had been claimed not by cowardice or miscalculation, but by the brutal calculus of war. Andrews honored them silently, a private ritual of remembrance in a world that would celebrate only the survivors. Each name was sacred, each story a reminder that courage often carries the heaviest toll. As trains continued their steady rhythm across the nation, Andrews felt the invisible pulse of history beneath the iron rails. The chase had been a small episode in the vast tapestry of the Civil War, yet it demonstrated the enormous impact a single audacious act could have on morale, perception, and memory. It was studied by military strategists, admired by civilians, and commemorated by historians, not merely as a daring exploit, but as a profound testament to the human spirit under pressure. Andrews' reflections extended beyond the immediate participants. He thought of the civilians along the chase route who had witnessed flashes of history passing through their lives, often unknowingly. Farmers, children, merchants, they had all glimpsed the extraordinary unfolding amid ordinary life. Their astonishment, fear, and eventual stories preserved another layer of the event, reminding Andrews that history was not only shaped by soldiers, but by those who observed, endured, and remembered. In the final years of his life, Andrews dedicated himself to ensuring the story remained unbroken by time. He spoke to young soldiers about courage and perseverance, wrote letters to historians correcting small inaccuracies, and guided the preservation of locomotives and rail lines connected to the event. He understood that truth was precious, fragile, and easily distorted. To him, history was not merely a chronicle of events. It was a living, breathing narrative sustained by memory, honesty, and attention to detail. Andrews also contemplated the essence of human courage. He realized it was not a single act, but a continuum, a thread woven from countless moments of decision, sacrifice, and risk. The chase had been defined by split-second judgments, the tension of uncertainty, and the relentless drive to continue despite overwhelming odds. Courage, he understood, was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act in spite of it. It was the quiet, persistent force that allowed men to persevere when failure seemed inevitable, when death was imminent, when the world itself seemed aligned against them. In his solitude, Andrews would sometimes close his eyes and hear the steam hiss, the whistle shriek, the pounding of iron wheels, and the shouts of men echoing across valleys and forests. Time had blurred the edges of fear, leaving only clarity, the audacity, the ingenuity, the unyielding resolve that had carried them through. The chase was no longer merely an event. It had become a symbol, a touchstone of courage and human endurance, a reminder of what men could achieve when ordinary lives intersected with extraordinary circumstances. When the end came, it was quiet. Andrews passed surrounded by family, the echoes of trains in the distance mingling with the memories of his youth and the turbulent days of the chase. The life he had lived was extraordinary, not because of fame or fortune, but because he had dared, persisted, and endured. His story, and the stories of those who had shared the rails with him, would live far longer than any individual life, etched into history with the vividness of human courage against impossible odds. The Great Locomotive Chase, nearly unbelievable yet entirely true, endured as a testament to audacity, ingenuity, and the indomitable human spirit. Ordinary men, confronted with extraordinary challenges, had acted with courage and creativity, leaving a legacy that would inspire countless generations. Their deeds had been etched into the very rails of history, a permanent reminder that courage, sacrifice, and determination could shape the course of events in ways both profound and unforgettable. Andrews's final thought lingered on the paradox of memory, that the smallest group of determined men could echo across history, their actions magnified by the risks they dared to take, their courage enduring long after the engines had cooled, the smoke had dissipated, and the battlefields had quieted. It was a story of terror and triumph, of human limitation and extraordinary achievement, of fear confronted with audacity. In that story, life and death, bravery and despair were inseparably intertwined. The whistle of a distant train carried on the evening wind, and Andrews, at last, could rest. The story of the chase, of courage tested and human limits pushed, would endure. The extraordinary deeds of ordinary men would continue to inspire, to teach, and to remind all who heard them of the fragile yet powerful force of the human spirit.